Hello and welcome to the ProCycle YouTube channel, where we'll be continuing along with our Project TW200 bike. I'm Tom, and today we're going to be adding a Ricochet skid plate and rejetting the carburetor with our own jet kit. The Ricochet skid plate is going to be a major armor upgrade to any TW200 versus the stock thin sheet metal skid plate. Next, the jet kit is going to help richen up the fuel mixture and give the bike a better throttle response and performance overall, especially after adding a new exhaust. Let's get started with the removal of this stock skid plate. On the forwardmost part of the skid plate is a single 10mm bolt holding the skid plate on. Remove that, then lower the skid plate down. Then you will lift the rear out of the way. Before you can install your new Ricochet skid plate, you will need to bend the thin metal bracket that the stock skid plate held onto up and out of the way to allow clearance for the new mounting brackets. You can also completely cut it off if you wish. Take the claw-shaped brackets and install them facing down and towards the rear of the bike. You will need a number 40 Torx bit to tighten these rear bolts, and use blue Loctite as needed. Be sure to leave them a little loose, as you may need to manipulate them during installation. Now, we'll begin to install the new skid plate. First, we need to slip the rear of the skid plate into position, simultaneously run one claw through the metal wire we previously bent out of the way, and the next we'll slip over the bar. Use the image for reference, then let the skid plate rest. We now need to remove the lowermost forward engine mounting bolt. The nut needs a 14mm socket, and the bolt head will need a 12mm socket. Next, grab your new replacement engine mounting bolt, slip a washer on, and run it through one of the supplied L brackets. Slide the bolt through the engine mount and put on the remaining L bracket and washer, followed by the lock nut with the nylon insert. Begin to tighten the bolt down with a 13mm socket on both ends. Do not tighten it all the way, as you will want to be able to pivot the L brackets to line up with the new skid plate. Now, raise the skid plate up and fasten it to the L brackets with the two remaining smaller bolts and washers. Apply a little blue Loctite as needed. This step in the instructions comes before putting the rear of the skid plate on, but I found it a little easier to mount the rear first, then the front of the skid plate. Either way is fine. I can't do nothing with you. At this point, everything should be where it needs to go, and now you can begin tightening everything down. I start at the rear and move forward. If you're having trouble getting to the engine mounting bolt, remove the bolts holding the skid plate to the L brackets and lower the skid plate out of the way for easier access. Wow, what a difference. You definitely can't bend the new skid plate like that. Let's begin the process of removing the carburetor so we can rejet it and gain more power. Use a 10mm wrench to loosen the throttle cables. Start with either cable. I started with the rear or pull cable. You'll loosen these up, and with your fingers or a set of needle nose pliers, grab the wire, pull down to rotate the cable end, and slip it out towards you. Repeat with the other cable, then push the cable towards the left side of the bike and out of the bracket holding them in place. Move the cables up and out of the way. Moving over to the left side of the bike, start by turning your fuel supply off. With a pair of pliers, move the spring clamp up and then slip the fuel line off of the carburetor. Have a rag and a container to catch what fuel is left in the line. Another method before starting this is to run the bike with the fuel off to run the carb dry. There will still be a little fuel in the carb, but it does help. Now loosen the intake clamps with a Phillips screwdriver. Pull the drain lines up and out from the swing arm. There are many different methods to remove a carburetor. I find it easy to almost hug the seat and use my fingers to press into the airbox side intake boot to force it off of the carburetor, and at the same time use my other hand from the other side of the bike to push and rotate the carb out of the bike. If you're having trouble, you may need to loosen the clamp some more. Do not use a screwdriver to push on the intake boot, as you may risk puncturing it. And be mindful of any remaining fuel in the carb. To begin the disassembly process, use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the diaphragm cap on the top of the carb. There is a spring under the cap, pull it out, and be oh so careful when you are removing the diaphragm. It's not uncommon for the diaphragm to stick to the carb. Pull the whole slide assembly out of the carb. A little tip here, when doing any kind of carburetor work, I find it very helpful to do all the work in an oil pan or even an old paint roller tray. Turkey roasting pan is fine. They all hold up to gasoline and help keep all of the little bits of the carb in one place. Tip the slide upside down to get the needle and components out. There should be a white plastic piece, a little spring, and then the needle assembly. In your new ProCycle jet kit, you will find a pre-assembled needle and 5 shims or tiny washers. Start with at least 1 washer. The more you add, the richer the fuel mixture will be. Reassemble the slide with the new needle followed by the little spring and the white plastic cap. Then the large spring to help hold the needle assembly in place while you reinsert the slide assembly back into the carb. Replace the cap and the 2 screws and you're halfway done. Flip the carb over and remove the float bowl. There are 4 Phillips screws holding it in place. I begin by removing the pilot jet and replacing it with a number 34 jet. These are brass, so don't crank down on it. It is recessed down into the carb, so you will need to have a thinner or skinnier flathead screwdriver handy. Most of us have one laying around from that package deal of screwdrivers we bought a long time ago and thought we'd never use. Well, now it's time to break it out of the depths of your toolbox. Next, we'll replace the main jet with a number 125 jet out of the ProCycle jet kit. The factory TK jet will need a 7mm socket to be removed. Use an 8mm wrench to hold the emulsion tube in place. Now, reinstall the float bowl back onto the carb. Before we can put the carb back into the bike, remove the clamp off of the airbox side intake boot. It makes installation much easier. Now, the process is pretty much a reversal of how we remove the carb. Start by hugging the seat again. It's okay, TWs need love too. Now, slip the engine side of the carb into the intake boot with your left hand and rotating the rear into its intake boot, all while pulling on it with your right hand from the other side. Once you get it started, use your fingers to push on the airbox side intake boot to help work it in onto the lip of the carb. This may take a little time, but you can do it. If you have trouble getting the lip on all of the way, a flathead screwdriver can be gently used to coax the rubber into place. Now let's reinstall that rear intake boot clamp and tighten both clamps down. Then slip your fuel line back onto the carb with the spring clamp in place. Then run the drain lines back down by the swing arm where they were before. There should be a little keeper to hold them in place. Onto the throttle cables, slip the push cable or forward cable into the bracket. Then pull down on the cable to help you slip the cable end into the throttle linkage. Tighten the cable up enough to hold it in place. With the pull cable, run the wire down and rotate the cable end counterclockwise and slip it into the throttle linkage. You may need a pair of pliers to help you get it into place. Now slip the cable into the bracket and start tightening it down. Give your throttle a little twist to check for slack. Adjust as needed to get your free play correct. That's about 2 to 3 millimeters of throttle tube movement before the throttle linkage on the carb begins to actually move.